In the fabulous book entitled Fearless, the author says, and I quote, Jesus' most frequent commands emerges from the fear not genre. He said the gospel gives us 125 Christ-issued imperatives, and 21 of those are where Jesus authoritatively says, fear not, don't be afraid, have courage, take heart, because I have overcome the world. Because 17% of the recorded commands of Jesus have to do with being courageous. And since the theme of our VBS last week was be courageous, and since we talked about being courageous in the last two adult classes that I've attended here, and since it takes a tremendous amount of courage to share your faith and to be open and honest with other people and talk to people about their soul, and since in the 2 nights of the adult classes on evangelism that I was blessed to attend, where I heard different people share their story of faith and their conversion story of what led them to Christ and ultimately led them here to Cross Point, I got the message loud and clear for the past 2 weeks that God wants me to be more courageous. And so I feel the need to talk about that this morning, and I hope it'll bless you. Let's open our Bibles together to the Old Testament book of Joshua, a book that bears the name of the man who 3 times in the opening of this book, Jehovah God tells him to be strong and courageous. According to Numbers 13, his given name was Hoshea, which means salvation. But his mentor, Moses, gave him the name Joshua, which means Yahweh saves. Don't miss that point. Even though the book bears the name of Joshua, and it tells about numerous battles and victories that Joshua won in the promised land, the point is, the Lord is the one who is really responsible for every victory that occurred. Please don't miss that point. Anything that we are able to accomplish for the kingdom and for the cause is not because of our might or power or for our name or for our glory, which is exactly the point that the Lord told Zerubbabel in Zechariah 4 and verse 6. But rather, whatever we are able to do and accomplish is because of the Lord. He's the one who's gone before us. He's the one who's opened the door for us. He's the one who's with us, and the one who empowers us, and the one who's working through us, through His Spirit. And it's all for His glory. And it should always be for Him and for His glory. And the church says, amen. I also find it fascinating that the shortened form of the Hebrew name Joshua is the Greek word that is used for Jesus. And so, as one commentator said, Joshua's very name as well as his work points beyond himself to the one who was greater than he. And that is Jesus, the author of our salvation, the one who triumphed over all of his enemies so that he might lead us all into that heavenly Canaan, which is the eternal promised land. With that as the foundation of our study, let's talk for just a moment about Joshua. Who was he? He was a Jewish man who lived in bondage with God's people in Egypt. And most scholars say that he was about 40 years old when God saved them and delivered them and led them out of Egypt. So think about what all Joshua saw with his own eyes and what all he heard with his own ears. Many of us saw the movie The 10 Commandments. Or more recently, the younger generation, the TV miniseries, The Bible. Joshua personally experienced the Exodus. And on the banks of the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army bearing down upon them with the intent of either recapturing them or killing them, Joshua heard Moses say, stand still, and you will see the salvation of the Lord. He heard Moses then say, the Lord will fight for us. You need only to stand still. And so, he stood still. He stood still when the strong east wind came and divided those waters, and they rolled back like a scroll. And Joshua, along with the rest of God's people, walked through that wall of water on dry ground, and he witnessed the power of the Lord. He also witnessed it when those waters then came together and flowed back over the Egyptians. Can you imagine? The first time the Bible introduces us to this man is in Exodus 17, right after that scene, where God's people encounter their first attack on their journey to the Promised Land. When the Amalekites attacked, Moses appoints Joshua to be the field general. That's our first introduction to him. And he takes all the fighting men out to fight the big bad Amalekites in the first battle that they'll ever have as God's people. Moses takes his brother Aaron and a man named Hur up to the hill to oversee the battle, while Joshua and the men fight it. And Moses quickly figures out that whenever his hands are outstretched, Israel prevailed. But when they got weary and he lowered his arm, the enemies prevailed. Do you remember the solution? The two men who were with Moses held up his hands all day long until the sun set. And I want to pause here and say, don't ever minimize your contributions to the kingdom, whatever they are. All of us are in this together, aren't we? And everybody has a role to play. And whatever you do, it is all vitally important to the victory. The Bible says, so Joshua overcame the Amalekites. And the Lord said to Moses, write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure that Joshua hears about it. Do what? Write down this victory, but make sure that Joshua knows that we're writing his name in here so that he'll be remembered. So Moses builds an altar there. And he names the altar Jehovah Nissi, which translates in our English Bible, the Lord is our banner. And what's Moses saying? He's saying to the people that our heart's allegiance is to the Lord. And yes, we fought. And yes, everyone had a part in the victory. And Joshua, you and your name will be prominent from here on. But make sure you remember that we were only victorious because of Him. That we went out with Him leading us and we were under His banner. Don't ever forget that. He's saying even personally to Joshua, you're a gifted warrior, my friend. But don't ever forget that you're to use your gifts to serve Him so that He will receive the glory and the kingdom will be blessed. So for the next 40 years, Joshua serves God by serving Moses, by being an aid to him. And Moses mentors Joshua well. Let me ask you, whom can you take under your wing and mentor and pass on your wisdom and your faith, who will then make a tremendous contribution to the kingdom long after you are gone? Moses chose Joshua to do that. So he takes him up the mountain when Moses went to meet the Lord and received the 10 Commandments. Can you imagine being on that smoke-filled, shaking mountain when the Lord descends down to talk to Moses? I bet Joshua never forgot that experience. Later on, when they got to the edge of the Promised Land, God told Moses to have each of the 12 tribes select one person, one leader from that tribe, to send out to explore Canaan. So the tribe of Ephraim chose Hoshea. And that's when Moses renames him Joshua, again reminding him that it is the Lord who saves. And when Joshua comes back from exploring the land of Canaan, he hears the people weeping and wailing and saying, we should choose another leader and we should go back to the land of Egypt. And when Moses heard that, do you remember his response? He lost it. He just falls down to the ground. And Joshua is the one who speaks up, and he says this: if the Lord is pleased with us, He'll lead us into that land. And He'll lead us to the victory. And He will give it to us. Don't rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of those people. Now, isn't that a fabulous attitude to have, a positive spirit to have? And the Bible tells us even more about Joshua's spirit. It tells us that he had the Spirit of the Lord, the spirit of leadership. And Deuteronomy 34 tells us that he was filled with the spirit of wisdom. So it's no wonder that God and Moses chose Joshua to take the baton of faith and lead them into the promised land. Now that's the background that has led us to the text this morning. God's people, when this book opens, are about 7 miles east of the Jordan River. And Moses calls the entire assembly together. And he retells at the end of Deuteronomy their salvation story one more time. Why would he do that? It's his last speech to the people. Moses doesn't want the younger generation to forget how great God is, how wonderful salvation is, and how blessed they are to be God's children. For those of us who have been saved and been a child of God for a long time, I hope and pray that we are still humbled by our salvation. And I hope that we're still excited about what the Lord has done, which is what we sang about last Lord's Day. Moses reminds them of their salvation story. And then he blesses the tribes. And then he says this to the church, to the assembly. He says, there's no one like our God, and He's eternal, and He's our refuge. And underneath Him are His everlasting arms, which is where He tells God's people you always need to stay. That's Deuteronomy 33:27. We just sung one verse of that hymn. I didn't ask Brother Steve to lead it. I'm glad he did. Because I feel connected to it, not only because it comes from this biblical story, but I feel connected to this song because it was written by a well-known advocate of gospel music who was from Dalton, Georgia, which is the next town up from Calhoun, where we raised our family. One evening in 1887, that man Anthony Showalter was leading a singing school in Hartselle, Alabama, on the very spot where Jared and Kathy South got married a couple of years ago, which is the second reason why I feel connected to this hymn. After dismissing the singing school for the evening, Anthony Showalter went back to his cabin, where he found 2 letters that had been delivered to him from 2 of his former students. When he read each letter, he found out that both of them were brokenhearted because, ironically, each one of them had just had their wife die. And they're writing him to inform him of that. And they just pour out their heart to him. And it's like Jeremiah said, for the hurt of my people I hurt. And Anthony Showalter was hurting for his friends. So he picked up a Bible, looking for a verse to comfort them. And he settled on Deuteronomy 33:27, which is the verse I just quoted. And he sent that verse in a letter to his two friends. Then he reached for another piece of paper and he wrote to another friend, the great preacher and hymn writer Elisha Hoffman, who had written the classic hymn that we sing, "I must tell Jesus all of my trials. I cannot bear these burdens alone. In my distress, he kindly will help me, because he ever loves and cares for his own." And so he wrote Elisha Hoffman, who had written that song, and he said, I have a line. It's a good chorus, but I can't finish it. Well, guess what the line was? The hook line was from Deuteronomy 33. It was this one. I'm leaning. I'm safe and secure from all alarms. I'm leaning on the everlasting arms. But he said, I can't finish it. Can you? Elisha Hoffman got that letter and he sent it back and he said, what about this? What a fellowship. What a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. And do you remember the last stanza? What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Did you hear that? Because I'm leaning on the everlasting arms. I have a blessed peace with my Lord so near, because I'm leaning on the everlasting arms. It came from Moses here at the end of Deuteronomy. And that's exactly how Moses felt and what he told God's children to do in his last sermon. And then he turns and they watch as this aged icon, 120 years old, walks up the mountain. He walks up to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, and they watch until he vanishes from their sight and they can't see him anymore. And he looks over into Canaan's fair and happy land. And he dies with him and the Lord. And the Bible says that the Lord buries him. Does that give you chill bumps like it does me? I'm always humbled. When someone asks me to say something at the funeral of their loved one, I'm also always touched when we go to the burial site together. But can you imagine God being the one who conducts Moses' sermon and then buries him? My goodness. That brings us to the opening of this book. And it opens with these words, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses his aide, Moses my servant is dead. Let the impact of that sink in. If you're old enough, I dare say that at one point in your life, most of us have gotten that call that ties your stomach in a knot, buckles your knees, a lump comes into your throat. And even though you've just heard the news, it takes a while to process it. I got that call at 3:45 in the morning a few weeks ago. I got it again at around 6 o'clock a few weeks before that. I was talking to a friend last night who's here this morning who said he's gotten that call a couple of times in his life, and in those instances had to go and tell his mother. Try to think about the impact of those words. God tells Joshua, Moses, my servant, is dead. It's Joshua's mentor. It's his hero. They've worked together for 40 years. They've been through so much together. When Joshua hears those words, I picture him feeling like Vice President Harry Truman did when he got word in 1945, with World War II going on, that President Roosevelt had died. And when asked how he felt, he said, "I felt like the moon and the stars and all the planets had fallen on me." And when he was introduced to the press for the first time, it's reported that he looked at the media and he said, "Boys, if you pray, pray hard for me. Are there any questions?" And the first reporter is reported to have said, "Mr. President," and before he could go further, Truman stopped him. And he said, "Sir, I wish you didn't have to call me that." I kind of imagine Joshua feeling the same way. And that leads us to this text. Let's read. "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all the people get ready to cross the Jordan River in the land I'm about to give you to the Israelites. Look at these promises. There are 6 of them here. I'll give you every place where you set your foot." Isn't that a great promise? "Your territory will extend," and he tells them where. Here's the second one. "No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, I'll be with you." Here's the third one. "I'll never leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you'll lead these people to inherit the land." Here's the next promise, the fifth one. It's a generational promise. "Because I'll lead your people to the land that I swore to their ancestors. Be strong and courageous. Be careful to obey all of my laws. Don't turn to the right or the left. Keep this book always on your lips. Meditate on it night and day. Then you'll be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous." There's the third time. "Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Here's the question this morning. What's courage? I'll try to do it quickly. The dictionary says it's the ability to do something that frightens you. Wikipedia says it's the choice and the willingness to confront agony, pain, danger, uncertainty, and intimidation. Hemingway said it's grace under pressure. Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison, said, "I've learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." John Wayne said, "Courage is being scared to death and saddling up anyway." That's courage. The theologian Karl Barth said, "Courage is fear that said its prayers." Max Lucado said, "Fear is the big bully in the school hallway. He's real, he's brash, he's loud, and he's threatening like Goliath. But like David, he saw the giant. He just saw more of God." So Lucado said, courage is God-focused instead of focusing on giant-sized problem. Eleanor Roosevelt, who loved and lived with her husband, who ended up in a wheelchair and had the pressures of the presidency for 4 terms, including going through the Depression and leading us in World War II. Miss Roosevelt said, "You gain strength and courage and confidence by every experience in which you stop and really look fear in the face. And then keep going, because you're able to say, I have lived through this horror and I can live through the next anything that comes my way." There's 6 aspects of courage. There's moral courage, spiritual courage, intellectual courage, emotional courage. There's social courage. There's personal courage. Courage is Daniel opening up his window and getting on his knees in prayer like he always did, even though he knows that if he does that today, he'll face a den of lions. Courage is Esther, walking in unannounced and uninvited, knowing that it could mean her death. But she does it because she cares so much for her people in the kingdom. Courage is Jonathan staying loyal to David even though his paranoid father wants him to bust up that friendship. Courage is Stephen looking death and the unbelieving Sanhedrin in the eye and telling them about Jesus. Courage is Sister Karen Renfro and Sister Paula Allen and Brother Robert Fields and their spouses, and so many other brothers and sisters here who have gracefully faced and faithfully dealt with cancer. Courage is Andrea Williamson and more friends of mine than I can name this morning. Otherwise, I would choke up. Continuing to live by faith and digging deep into their faith and not letting the enemy steal their memories or their faith or their joy. Courage, I see it every time Brother Oscar Ray Peden walks in here. He's one of the first three that's here every Sunday morning, and he can barely walk, and it takes all the energy that he has to make that long journey from the parking lot. Even though we've put up a place that's close. It's not close. But courage is watching him faithfully come in here because he loves the Lord and loves assembling here and loves singing and communing with his brothers and sisters and being encouraged by them, which he encourages us. Courage. The two people I saw in my Bible class who, though they had lost their jobs, believed with tears in their eyes that God would provide. Courage is standing up for what's right and standing up for injustice and speaking up for those who have no voice. Teens, courage is saying no and not giving in to peer pressure that your worldly friends at school this year will tempt you with doing. Things that are not right, and courage is standing up and saying no. No. Courage is doing the next right thing, whether we're talking about those in the recovery community or not, or all the rest of us. Courage is fighting for your marriage. From this text, courage is rooted and grounded in the promises of God. They have four things in common. I could go on and on and on, but we'll do it this way. Courage has the common theme of bravery in the face of danger, which translates into this. It's saying, I will not be so afraid that I cannot function in life. It's steadfastness in the face of opposition. It's saying, like Churchill said to his people during World War II, we may be bombarded, but we will never give up. Thirdly, it's action in the face of resistance that says, I will not give in just because someone is against me or someone's critical of me or criticizes me or us. And fourthly, it's godly optimism in the face of despair that's based on the Word of God and the promises of God that allows us to say, like Jesus, I will not lose heart. I love the Casting Crown song entitled Courageous that goes like this. We were made to be courageous. We were made to lead the way. And we could be the generation that finally breaks the chains. We were once warriors on the front line, standing unafraid, but now it seems we're watchers on the sidelines while our families slip away. Where are you, men of courage? You were made for so much more. Let the pounding of our hearts cry, we'll serve the Lord. We were made to be courageous. We're taking back the fight. We were made to be courageous, and it starts with us tonight. This is the only way we'll ever stand. It's on our knees with lifted hands. This is our resolution, our answer to the call. We'll love our wives and children and the Lord, and we'll refuse to let our wives and families fall. We'll reunite the passion that's buried deep inside. May the watchers become the warriors. Let the men of God arise. And that's what we say again this morning. I'll close with the challenge that Alan Mitchell made in that movie in 2011 entitled Courageous, where a number of them were policemen. Now, we had already shown here at Cross Point on a Sunday night fireproof. Do you remember that? And by the way, it takes courage, and I want to give a shout out to our first responders, our firemen, our policemen, and those who work. It takes courage to take that love dare in fireproof. But Adam Mitchell stands at the end of that after having gone through numerous trials, and he tells a packed house and an audience, it's time. It's time for all of us to arise. So he says, you do not have to ask who'll teach my son to follow Christ, because I will. Who will accept the responsibility of providing and protecting my family? I will. Who will ask God to break the chains of the destructive patterns in my family's history? I will. Who will pray for and bless my children to boldly pursue whatever God calls them to? I will. I want the favor of God and His blessings on my home. Any good person does. So where are you? He says, men of courage. It's time to answer the call. And he says, I will, I will, I will. It takes courage to respond to that challenge. It takes courage to respond to the invitation of the Lord. It takes courage to share the gospel with Jesus and to live for Jesus. And so our lesson this morning is be strong and courageous. If you have that courage this morning and need to respond to the most courageous of all, the Lion of Judah, then we encourage you to come this morning as together we stand and sing.